DAESANG season is around the corner, and this year's race for K-pop's biggest grand prizes is closer than ever before. For the last 2 years, I've broken down the data to predict who actually takes home the trophies, and my predictions have been almost scary accurate. Today, we're running it back for year 3, and we're looking at the big 3 DAESANG categories plus Rookie of the Year, laying out the top 6 contenders based on the numbers, so let's break down who has the best odds at winning this year. Starting with the Artist of the Year. Le Sserafim are one of the first to consider. Now, this is a bit of a trickier one considering that their highlight of the year was that giant collab with both i-dle and Katseye, which have boosted their streaming numbers substantially. If we include that song, they have over 250 million total streams this year, but with only their work, it cuts that by about half to 155 million, which is still pretty good but a notable difference. Their sales are also pretty solid at over 600,000 copies, but their only one music show win tells us that they haven't been as dominant as previous years, and they still have not achieved a perfect all kill across their entire career, which just amazes me to this day. However, their rankings were pretty strong, reaching as high as number 8 domestically for Celebration, whereas Iconic by Mistake were inches away from the absolute top at number 3 on Billboard's Korean global chart. They are much stronger globally though, which isn't much of a surprise. They have reached number 10 on Billboard's Bubbling Under 100 and landing at number 3 on the iTunes Worldwide Albums, both of which are really competitive platforms. Now, I say this every year and I'll say it again. Even though Le Sserafim are one of the most dominant groups among the 4th generation today and get themselves in the conversation for a DAESANG, they still are not the top dogs in contention. That's not to say that they can't win one, as they already have 2 under their belt, but I would say that they are just not the favorites again, and I feel like I've been saying that for almost 3 years now. I honestly don't know what else they would need to do to improve their odds, because I feel like they are already doing everything at a high level, so maybe they're just unlucky. i-dle is another group that have been in the race for the grand prize since their debut back in 2024, but like Le Sserafim, always fall short. And even though it feels like they are leading the 5th generation with all their big hits, the numbers tell us that even that's not enough. For example, they just barely have over 500,000 copies sold, which is just slightly less than Le Sserafim, and are pretty much on par with them on streaming numbers as well, which sits at 177 million. And again, with Iconic by Mistake, it almost doubles that. However, they are ahead for their own work, reaching the number 1 spot with It's Me domestically, number 2 on Japan's Billboard Hot 100, and by the way, they are doing really well in Japan, and lately it feels like they are catering more towards that Japanese audience. Think of Sunday Morning, I Got Your Back, Bubby, and so forth, so no surprise there. They have reached as high as number 34 on Billboard's global platform, which is amazing, and have earned a total of 4 wins. They're pretty much on par with Le Sserafim, but i-dle has the slight edge with their chart rankings. Hearts to Hearts has to be in consideration, as they have accumulated almost 200 million streams on Spotify, with 150 of that with Rude alone. This tells us that they could soon become a giant within the industry and could be in contention for that leadership title down the road as well. So they picked up 5 music show wins, have reached number 1 domestically with Rude and number 8 with Lemon Tang, which is still really impressive. Globally, they have entered Billboard's Global 200 at number 57 and number 10 for digital song sales. So they're doing really damn good, and even though they have reached number 1 domestically with Rude, they weren't able to achieve the perfect all kill, which is the achievement of reaching number 1 simultaneously on all domestic platforms. And keep in mind, they've only been in the industry for a little over a year, and they're already putting up big numbers. And they just came out with a Japanese single, but I think it's too early for me to speak on that. Now, one group that has been a regular in this conversation is i-dle. They've sold over 1 million copies, which is half compared to last year's 2 million. They also hover around 150 million streams on Spotify. They reached as high as number 1 domestically and reached number 3 on Billboard's Korea's Hot 100. But globally, they're not as dominant, as they only peaked at number 61 on Billboard's Global 200. Now, the one area where i-dle remains dominant is on the music show wins, where they have 9. And with that, they have achieved achieved a triple crown, and also that's their sixth perfect all kill. And don't forget, with their fifth perfect all kill from last year, they surpassed both Twice and BTS, which is outstanding. And I know music show wins don't matter when it comes to Daesangs, but I only bring them up to showcase how strong their music has performed domestically. You know, anytime we talk about I.V, we usually mention aespa, as this year they both look very similar. For example, they both have sold over 1 million copies, and again this time last year they had 2 million. But even so, they still put up 214 million streams on Spotify, which is fantastic. They've reached as high as number 1 domestically and averaged the top 3 across all major platforms. On the global side, they entered Billboard's Global 200 at number 20 and reached as high as number 9 on their album Top 200. So they look really impressive everywhere except for their music show wins, which only sits at 3, which again is a big difference compared to last year's 14. So now in first place, we have Blackpink. What can I say? Their sales numbers have been really impressive with 2 million copies sold. Their streaming numbers are over 200 million on Spotify and have reached number 1 on pretty much every platform, both domestically and globally. For example, Go was their big hit song, which ranked number 1 on Spotify Global. Deadline ranked number 1 on the iTunes album chart. It entered the top 10 on Billboard's Global 200, and it peaked number 1 on all domestic platforms. However, they only managed to pull off 3 music show wins, which is nothing compared to their 10 wins with Jump last year. Now that we've gone through all the data, we can clearly see that Blackpink have the upper hand here. I mean, whenever it comes to these grand prizes, they usually weigh the sales higher than anything else, but streaming numbers also play a factor, especially if it's a big difference. Now, I've also included Baby Monster as my dark horse for this category. They look pretty strong from top to bottom. I mean, they have over 800,000 sales, 137 million streams. Chum peaked at number 2 domestically, number 1 on iTunes worldwide, and number 11 on Billboard's Global 200. But they didn't get a single music show win this year, and if we look at lifetime wins, they only have 2. So that tells me that they aren't as strong domestically as I initially imagined. But the main reason why I don't have them in my top 6 is because of both LE SSERAFIM and I.Dle's streaming numbers. Like I've mentioned, Iconic by Mistake literally doubles all their numbers, and if that's taken into consideration, then it could change the conversation drastically. But even without that, they still have more than Baemon. Now, even though Blackpink has the best odds on paper, who are my favorites to win? Personally, I would love to see any of the 5th generation groups win it this year, so that could be I.Dle, Hearts to Hearts, or even Baemon. And I say that because we have yet to see any girl groups within the 5th generation win a single Daesang, and it's been about 3 years now, and someone has to win it eventually, so I would love to see that happen this year. For the album of the year, we see a lot of similarity, and it's actually closer than you might think. Like I've mentioned, LE SSERAFIM has over 600,000 copies sold, and it's enough to put them in the race, but when it comes to this category, sales matter significantly more than streaming numbers. So going back to that last section, they were also in the same position. Hearts to Hearts has the slight edge over LE SSERAFIM, but it's still not that much of a gap to put them in a higher position. They are on track to hitting 700,000, but even that ain't enough. Now, even though Baby Monster was my dark horse for the Artist of the Year, I think they have much better odds for Album of the Year, as they are on the path to 1 million, and being that Chum was successful worldwide, they could hit that number by the time these award shows take place. I mean, the same can be said for both LE SSERAFIM and Hearts to Hearts, but obviously they have more catching up to do. However, I feel like if any of those 3 were to release another album, that could place them in serious contention. And that's mainly because both aespa and I.V are at the same level of 1 million copies. So really, it's a toss-up between them 2 right now. I tried looking up if there's any more releases coming out this year for anybody on here, but I couldn't find anything. But like always, we have a few months left in the year, so who knows? Things could look different by the end of the year. But of course, even if anybody would have another album release, they will need to catch up to Blackpink's gargantuan 2 million sales, which, no offense, I doubt that anybody would have a chance catching up anytime soon. I mean, the difference is just too substantial. So for this award, I think we could potentially see a deadline sweep. Now, that's not to say that I would want to see that, considering how much I disliked the album personally. I would much rather see someone else from here take it, but again, the numbers don't lie. Now, easily my favorite section this year, mainly due to the diverse competition, is the Song of the Year. Comparing the hits from this year to last year, I would favor 2026 substantially more, not just because I think the music this year was better, but also because we have different groups and idols in the race compared to the usual suspects. So that's refreshing. One that might surprise a lot of you guys is Yena's Catch Catch. I know this was a big hit the last couple of months and it was trending everywhere, which is great. I think the last time we've seen Yena blow up was way back with Nemu Nemu, so it feels good to see her in contention again. That said, I don't have her at the absolute top, mainly because of the tenure of the song. It hasn't been out as long as some of the songs that we're about to mention, and I know tenure isn't considered when it comes to actually winning this award, but when you stack a song that's held a higher average position across a full year against one that just, blew up for a couple months recently, you get a much clearer picture of who actually performed better. And that's why I.O.I's Rebel Heart was so impressive last year, because from January to December, it has remained that top position for so long, which in the end brought them much success. Regardless, I do think Catch Catch will get plenty of nominations at minimum, because if we look at the stats for her song, it has reached a peak of number 5 domestically. It entered the top 3 on Japan's Billboard Hot Seekers, and it reached number 70 on Korea's Billboard Hot 100, and it has accumulated over 80 million streams on Spotify, which is great. So even though it hasn't reached the absolute number 1 position, it's still performing well enough to contend. Now, as for i-dle, I feel like they always manage to find themselves in this category. Think of Magnetic, Jellious, Not Cute Anymore, and now with It's Me, they are starting to give me the same vibes as LE SSERAFIM. Now, obviously, they have a long way to go to reach such a status, but just the fact that they've shown so much consistency over the years is really impressive. So even though this song hasn't reached number 1 on most of the charts, it came close many times, as it has averaged the top 5 position on many platforms throughout the year. Granted, it hasn't been on as long as some of the other songs on here, but for its performance, I think it does deserve a mention. For example, it did land number 2 on Melon's Top 100 and Hot 100, which is really impressive. It got a few number 1s on daily charts, which is still great, but that's obviously not as difficult as a weekly or even a monthly ranking. Now, it did land on Billboard's US exclusive at number 32, which is also pretty good, and they have accumulated about 120 streams on Spotify, which is just another day in the office for i-dle, as they can pull off 100 million streams like it's nothing. I mean, just look at their track record. Another song that's in the same boat is I.O.I's Suddenly. It's only been out for a few months, but it has a higher average on chart rankings, where it did reach the number 1 spot multiple times domestically, and even achieving the real-time all-kill, which is very similar to a perfect all-kill with the exception of the daily and weekly charts. On global platforms, it entered the Billboard Global 200 at number 136, whereas Yena's Catch Catch did not enter at all. However, there is a huge gap in their streaming numbers, since Suddenly only has about 20 million compared to Yena's 80 million. So when it comes to these two, it's really close, but I gave the slight edge to I.O.I because they're much more dominant domestically, where it matters most for day songs. Now, remember when I talked about tenure a moment ago? Here we go again with I.O.I's Bang Bang. This is another song that has dominated the charts since the beginning of the year, and we could see something very similar to Rebel Heart from last year, and that's where they average the top spots for the majority of the year. So for them, they instantly sweep the charts, as they have achieved their 6th perfect all kill, which means that they have held the number 1 position on all major domestic platforms at the same time, and that includes every chart, daily, hourly, and weekly, which even I.O.I's Suddenly could not achieve. Plus, I've held the number one position for over 5 consecutive weeks. Not for the pack, of course, but just on some platforms. And since then, they've picked up over 70 million streams on Spotify. They've reached number 3 on Korea's Billboard Hot 100 and peaked at number 61 on their Global 200. So clearly, IVE has a very strong position in the race for not just one, but several Daesangs this year. And just based on all the Daesang videos that I've made, this seems to be normal for IVE. And it just really proves to us that they are really one of the most impressive groups in K-pop history. Kiki's 404 New Era has to be one of the biggest surprises to me this year. I mean, last year, if you were to ask me, I never would have envisioned them in the race for a Daesang anytime soon. I mean, they did have a bit of a slow start compared to someone like Hearts to Hearts, who really had 2025 in a chokehold. But this year, it really feels like they've made much progress with their potential. It was one of the first songs of the year, and I remember how it blew up and took over the industry for a moment. But what amazed me even more is how long it has lasted on the charts, especially at a high position. For example, they hit number one on pretty much every platform that I could find. They were number one on Circle Chart. They've even reached number one on Melon's Top 100, which is really impressive. They peaked at number one on Spotify domestically, and they were ranked number one on Billboard's Best K-pop Songs of 2026, which is out fucking standing. And this song alone pulled in over 70 million streams on Spotify as well. So, this song could be the hit that Kiki needs to reach that upper echelon of the industry. As before, I feel like they were just slightly short, but now we can see that the potential is truly there, so good on them. And finally, in first place, Hearts to Hearts for their song Rude. I mean, look, this song was a huge hit, and even though it's not my favorite song from them, I cannot deny its dominance. And very similar to Kiki, they have pretty much held the number one position on every platform domestically, and even though today they hover around the top 5, and even in the top 10 in some areas, they also have that longevity factor that I've mentioned, as this was one of the first songs of the year. And yes, I know, it came out in February, but this year we had such a slow start on new music, which really sucked at the time. But anyway, this reached over 150 million streams on Spotify, which makes this a big hit for them, and reached as high as number 10 on World Digital Song Sales, which is incredible. Now, even with that, there are some dark horses to look out for, such as aespa's Lemonade, Hwasa's Good Goodbye, and Racine's Love Attack. Kind of shocking to find aespa this low on a list of this magnitude, as they're typically on here with the likes of IVE every year, but Lemonade did not dominate as much domestically as I initially expected. I mean, they did land number 4 on Melon's Top 100, which is great, but I really struggled to find them hit that number 1 position on most platforms. They've accumulated over 70 million streams on Spotify, and they were much superior globally, reaching as high as number 20 on Billboard's 200, but again, when it comes to these awards, domestic numbers reign supreme. Even though those are still some pretty solid numbers, they do not have that longevity as some of the other songs on here, as it did come out in late May. Hwasa's Good Goodbye is a toss-up. I know it came out last October, but it still performs really well on domestic charts. I mean, it reached number 1 on a lot of platforms, and it is on pace to hit 100 million streams soon. It's also one of the best-selling digital songs worldwide, and it did achieve a real-time all-kill, and yeah, it did already win a Daesang recently at the KM Chart Awards, so there's that. But the reason why it's not in my top 6 is because it's a song from last year, and very similar to Racine's Love Attack, that song was from 2 years ago, but with their recent explosion in popularity, it has revived their old music, which brings it up to contention. So those two are the wild cards here, and that's not to say that they have the lowest odds on here compared to my top 6, but more so it's just a complicated pick. But who would be my favorites from here? Again, anybody from the 5th generation would really make my day, but if I had to narrow it down even further, I think a win from either Kiki or Hearts to Hearts would be amazing. Just based on a lot of the comments that I've seen over the past year, I think a lot of people really underestimate them, and I think a grand prize win from them before i-dle and Baemon would really shake things up in the industry. Alright, probably one of the most difficult categories this year, and it's not really because it was hard to find a winner, but more so just the lack of competition, the Rookie of the Year. For example, we just barely have two rookies this year, at least on the level of serious contention. I know there are technically a few others, but those are like super underground. One of the first groups is Heart of Woman, so they have about 12,000 sales, which is really low, but again, they don't have the resources as one of the big four companies. However, what I found really impressive about them is that they were mentioned on Billboard's Best K-pop Albums of the Year at number 15. So that tells us that they do have some potential. But even then, they only have slightly over a million streams and have ranked number 80 on Circle Chart. Not really the most impressive stats, especially if we want to compare them to other groups that we've mentioned before. Now, above them is Unchild. This shouldn't really be much of a surprise. I mean, they clearly had more of a significant debut as they have accumulated almost 12 million streams on Spotify. But here's where it gets tricky. They don't have any sales this year since they haven't had any physical release, and domestically they also hover around the 80th ranking, similar to Heart of Woman. So between these two, Heart of Woman has more of a polished resume, considering that they have sales and global recognition, but Unchild has way more streaming numbers, which I think could overpower here. Would I say I have a favorite? Not necessarily. I mean, no offense, but I think this year it's probably been one of the most underwhelming rookie lineups in years. I mean, just about every year we've had at least a few rookie groups that blew up, but we have yet to see that this year. And I know about Our Birthday and Twid. I still don't know how to pronounce that.
tweed, tweed. T-U-I-D-E.
Okay. I know there's a lot of fans talking about them already, and their debuts should happen soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if they surpassed both Unchild and Heart of Woman by the end of the year. Especially
tweed,
as I already see a lot of fans already comparing them to other groups, which I personally think is unfair, but let's just wait and see. So there we go, those are my DAESANG predictions for the year. And I know I made this a bit earlier this year, but that's because there are already some award shows going on, and a lot of these groups, as far as I know, don't have much left planned for the rest of the year, so thought I'd just get it over with. But I still got quite a few other videos in the works, so be on the lookout for that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.